All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can email us, as always, at bigben@fox.com. Follow me on X at bdomenech. You can subscribe to my newsletter, The Transom, at thetransom.com, and my magazine, The Spectator, at thespectator.com. And I want to talk to you for a minute about summer vacations. I know that everyone vacations a little bit differently, but for me, it goes something like this.
Jerry Seinfeld doing Louis C.K.
Right. Okay. So I'm going on my vacation with my wife, my family. We pack up the car and the kids, and I'm clicking in the car seats, and I put the wife in, and I get everything set. And it's so much work to get a family in a car. I close the door for my wife on the passenger side. I walk around to the driver's side. That's my vacation.
Yeah. Tetrising the back of the Tahoe and getting it on the road for the nearly 7-hour-long trip to the beach that we take every summer is something of a challenge for me, particularly with 2 young girls, a pregnant wife, and all of the hassle of the things that get forgotten and that you have to turn around and get and pick up and the stops that you have to make and everything else like that. This time around, our vacation was going pretty smoothly. But I have this attitude towards vacation that anticipates they're always going to be cursed in one way or another. Certain events have happened in the past when we've gone to the beach. Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago was raided, and they had to send a TV van so that I could be on camera from the Outer Banks. Donald Trump was suffered an attempted assassination another time that we were on vacation. In fact, I remembered that going back before we had kids, one of the last great vacations we had was in Greece during the time that Steve Scalise got shot during the attack that happened a stone's throw from my house in Alexandria, Virginia, all those days back ago. And then, of course, there's just the minor inconveniences, problems, health issues, food poisoning. Vacations for me, they just always seem like just such a weight. I always need a vacation after the vacation. This time around, though, I was feeling pretty good. We got down there in time. We were, everything was in order. We had a little bit more chaos than expected because there were a lot of people in town. But we got through the first week. The kids loved going back to the aquarium where they saw the sharks and all that kind of thing. They had great times out on the beach. Both my kids can swim at age 4 and 2. I strongly advise you to teach your kids to swim early. It's a big help. And then we had, family and we had friends coming through and all that kind of good stuff. We get to the second week and Hurricane Tropical Storm Erin is coming in the direction of the Outer Banks. And I'm someone who grew up around hurricanes. I have the hubris of someone whose treehouse survived Hurricane Hugo, even with the eye of the storm passing over it. And I have the attitude, if you're a tropical storm, that ain't nothing to worry about, especially if you're one that's not going to make landfall. That's an attitude, of course, that the locals share with me. However, I am married to someone who is from the American West, and while she's not scared about all sorts of things like derecos and about tornadoes and all sorts of other manner of threats, something along the lines of a hurricane or even a tropical storm seems quite scary to her. So we have the conversation on Monday, and I'm looking forward to this week because it's the first week where it's the second week of the vacation. We're going to not have anybody around. It's going to be peaceful and quiet, and we're not going to have to plan, dinners for more than the kids. And, maybe I'll finally actually get to crack open one of the 3 books that I brought to the beach, as opposed to just lugging and carrying stuff back and forth. I'm looking forward to it. I want to stay. It's going to be fine. It'll be a couple of windy days, at worst. Nothing's going to flood. We're all fine. I convince her of this on Monday. And because of that, I go out and I do the normal thing that I do at the beginning of the week when we're on a vacation, which is I go and I spend an absurd amount of money at the local grocery stores to stock up for the week. And so, you get the bottled water, you get all the juice that the kids need, you get all the snacks that they need, you get the food for the week and everything like that so that you can plan ahead and you don't have to keep making runs. And of course, inevitably, you forget things and you end up having to make runs. But still, everything's good to go. We have a plan. Everything's going to be fine. And then, looming like a dark cloud on the horizon, disguised by her ability to wear phenomenal hats, comes one Janice Dean. Janice Dean comes in the form of messages to my wife at the beach, informing her that she is crazy to stay there and that we need to get out as soon as possible, that this storm could actually turn and could be quite dangerous for all of us, and that it's crazy to be at the beach with young kids in this environment. I immediately start getting texts from my wife, emergency, call me, emergency. 3 calls and an email. This is actually quite typical in terms of her communication. It could be about something that Hunter Biden did. It could be about something on the news. It could be about something funny that she just saw. So don't be weirded out. As I'm in line at the grocery store and to get one of the things that I had forgotten, and I get on the phone, she says, we have to leave, and we have to leave now. I talk to her. I say, can we sleep on it? We have, the back and forth. I know, though, of course, that you do not win an argument with my wife easily anyway, and you particularly have the stakes upped when she is pregnant. Then you lose every argument by default. And so from my perspective, I'm just trying to manage the scenario. Hey, we have all these games. Hey, I was looking forward to reading to the girls. Hey, it's going to be fine if they're inside for a day or two after spending the last 8 days out under the hot sun. To no avail. So we get out the next morning, we drive away. But before we do, I bequeath upon my neighbor someone who had just come in the day before, who I don't know from Adam, a very nice redneck named Sean, the bounty of all of the different groceries that I had just purchased for the week, something to the tune of $400 or $500. He was overwhelmed by the generosity, offered me beer and cigarettes in response as payment, but I declined to accept under the belief that you can never have too many redneck friends.
You're a real moonshiner now, you son of a bitch. Go forth and brew my ancient elixir with these sacred jugs.
I look forward to the day we meet again, you wise old cracker.
You are always welcome here, Budrow. You are my kin. And I will let you drive my Camaro when I fix the god-dang drive shaft.
Thank you, Sean, and enjoy your American spirits. So we get on the road and we go up to near Williamsburg, where I give the kids a little tour of the old candy shop and the campus where I went to William and Mary. And we end up at a little resort there, fine little place. And unfortunately, basically discover it's a resort for old people, and that the pool that my wife had aspirations that the kids could have fun in is, one that's much more for jazzercise, let's say, than for kids running around. And so Dad is determined to salvage this last end of the vacation before we come back. And thankfully, Busch Gardens, Williamsburg is right there. And so the upshot of this is that for all of the hectic nature, for all of the chaos of having to flee the beach the way that we did, my 4 and 2-year-old daughters got to ride their first roller coasters, real roller coasters, by the way. They were just a hair, a half an inch and an inch above the cutoffs for things. And man, did the older one love the Big Bad Wolf. So look, at the end of the day, they had a phenomenal time and enjoyed the log flume, enjoyed the old old-timey approach of Busch Gardens, which has some great coasters, by the way. And Dad salvaged the vacation with the one thing that they've been talking about ever since, not going back to the beach, but when they can ride roller coasters again. So look, I'm not bitter, Janice Dean, for you disrupting my vacation. You gave me an opportunity to prove that I'm an awesome dad. So no harm done, no harm felt. But gosh, weather people, man, they can put the fear into their friends like nobody else. You have to use that power responsibly. I'm sure everyone has their equivalent of a Clark Griswold vacation story. Why don't you leave that in the comments below? I'm Ben Dominette. You're listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. We'll be back with Miranda Devine right after this. And we're back on The Big Ben Show. Happy to welcome first-time guest on the show, Miranda Devine. She is a New York Post columnist, Fox News contributor, host of Podforce One, a podcast you can find on the New York Post. You can follow her on all the social media accounts at Miranda Devine. Miranda, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you about all the different things that are in the news, and I do want to get to that. But I've been away from the mic for the last 10, 14 days or so. And because of that, we had some shows that didn't talk about some of the things that have happened in that time that connect back to the entire Russiagate scenario. I know that this is an area of expertise for you and one that you have observed and obviously reported about extensively over the years. And I'm curious about your attitude toward the stepped up approach that the administration is using when it comes to holding a lot of different prominent people to account who played fast and loose with the facts, who made claims that were unjustified, who perhaps referred to classified information in ways that were inaccurate to go after the president over the course of all those years when they made Russiagate a thing. What do you think about their approach thus far? And do you think that we're actually going to see some real ramifications for all these different individuals, names that are familiar to us by now, who need to be held to account, it seems to me, if there's going to be any real consequences for their misbehavior?
Yeah, Ben, look, I think it is markedly a different attitude to the one that was in Trump's first term. I think that this is a very determined and systematic approach to having accountability. And I think that's for two reasons. Mostly, I think, because, and why everyone's so surprised, is because in his first term, Trump was very merciful. He talks about the fact that at his rallies, his supporters are chanting, "Lock her up," about Hillary Clinton. And he decided and told everybody not to do anything to Hillary Clinton. He said that she was the, wife of a former president. She's a former Secretary of State. She deserves respect. Let's just leave her alone. And thinking that the country needed to heal. And that was his motivation. That we needed to get over the divisiveness of the Obama years. Well, he was rewarded with just complete treachery, character assassination, the Russiagate hoax, 2 impeachments after he left, in the 4 years in exile before he came back to the White House. 91 felony counts from 3 different Democratic prosecutors. They tried to throw him in jail. They tried to bankrupt him. They tried to even stop his sons from doing business in New York. They came after his family. He survived 2 assassination attempts, which many of his supporters blame on the fact that the Secret Service just wasn't taking his safety seriously. And Alexandra Mayorkas, who was in charge of the Secret Service, then Biden's DHS secretary, didn't allocate enough resources, despite the fact that the Trump campaign was crying out for them. So effectively, you can hold his political enemies responsible for the events in Butler and the subsequent attempted assassination. So they threw everything at him, and yet the American people still chose him overwhelmingly. He won on every metric possible. He won the popular vote. And so, unlike with his first term, his enemies can't call him an illegitimate president, even though he was legitimate then as well. So now he has all that political capital and a newfound determination that there will be no mercy. And not because he isn't actually, I think to his own detriment, kind of instinctively merciful. When Hillary Clinton said something halfway, she was actually being sarcastic, I believe, decent about him the other day. He said, "Oh, that was nice. Maybe, I shouldn't be so mean to her." No, that's not the way it is. And that's not the way people in his administration feel, or any of his supporters. If these people who behaved so illegally and irrationally and unethically to try and grab power for themselves, if they're not held to account, then God knows what happens to the next Republican president.
Last night on CNN, Jeffrey Toobin said regarding the Trump administration going after some of these prominent individuals. This criminal crusade against political adversaries is completely unprecedented in all of American history. Now,
that is
look,
hilarious.
I'm sorry. It's just, where have you been for the last, I mean, I realize you were put in time out for a little bit, Mr. Tubin, but, certainly you were paying attention to the news. I feel like this is something that, people are setting their hair on fire, obviously, on a number of different wavelengths on the left about this. But to me, what this actually indicates about, and you mentioned the difference between the first administration, the second administration. I don't view this actually as vindictive. I view this as revealing things, as being transparent, because the transparency itself is the indictment of what they actually had to say. Meaning, that when what Adam Schiff, I think, is really worried about when it comes to all of these different things is that we have a conversation that reveals and that includes the kind of information that he was running with that, is similar to the things that we've learned about John Brennan, about James Clapper, about these others who essentially were looking at materials behind the scenes and then misrepresenting them repeatedly to the American people, lying to them about what was inside of them, and fomenting this cloud that hung over the entire first Trump term. And the fact that they now are being called out on that, it essentially has put them in a posture of either, well, this is long past history, and we all know everything that's in there, and we all know what, and we had reasons to believe at the time, and they just sort of try to fudge it, and to me, when I hear that, it's like, well, we had our argument about this on Monday. Like it's just it's yesterday. It's not like the distant past. So we're not even a full year into the second term. Do you think that there's going to be? I mean, I know that the MAGA base would like, or some portions of it would like to see people, punished, go to jail, have serious consequences in terms of their career. Do you think though that that's a little bit of sort of wishful thinking, and just given the realities of DC, given the way that the blob and the swamp protect its own, is at the end of the day, the best that we can hope for transparency about knowing what these people actually did?
No, I don't at all. I think, John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, the other day said the conspiracy against Donald Trump, which, the Russiagate conspiracy to try and cripple his presidency, and then continuing on to ensure that he would not ever be able to run for office again. He said that is a conspiracy that lasts until today. So I think that you're seeing there's so much information that's being declassified and released by Tulsi Gabbard that I think people are missing the forest for the trees. This is a systematic exposure which is being followed up by criminal referrals to the DOJ. Pam Bondi has put a strike force of dedicated prosecutors onto investigating this. Like everyone in America knows, that when the Federal Department of Justice wants to indict you, they will indict you. The old cliche about indicting a ham sandwich. I mean, they indicted Donald Trump for things that are just so preposterous, but they still did it. And in that case, I guess, on the one hand, the process is the punishment. On the other hand, there was real wrongdoing here. I mean, things that are really detrimental to America's national security. The Russiagate hoax so poisoned, the establishment, the people who made decisions against the idea of Donald Trump in his first term trying to reset the relationship with Russia, which would have been for the benefit of the United States and the entire world, and allowed America to focus on the real adversary, which was China. And yet he was crippled in that situation. And not only that, I think he had to prove that he was no puppet of Putin by bending over backwards to do harm to Russia. So, and ultimately, what we saw as the fruit of that poison tree was Russia invading Ukraine and the catastrophe that's unfolded ever since, and the fact that, you know, the Russiagate hoax still plays into Donald Trump's sort of calculations about trying to end this war. You know, which is Joe Biden's war, as he keeps telling us. So I think that there need to be, jail terms. There needs to be proper deterrence for any future CIA director, FBI director, or any other national security official who, or member of Congress who lies and leaks classified information. There need to be serious repercussions and jail time, because without that deterrence, they will double down next time. And I think that's crystal clear to everybody.
I think that you just said the most important aspect of this, which is that this is actually not about Donald Trump anymore. It's about making sure that something like this does not happen ever again. That this is something that is viewed as being complete anathema, and that no person within that intel justice hierarchy, you know, is ever willing to go down this road, because they see the ramifications for their career, they see the ramifications legally, and they are not willing to mess with the type of ramifications as they come, whether it comes, you know, just in terms of the public eye, or whether it comes via the law. I want to ask you a little bit about what we've seen in the last couple of months regarding the level of hypocrisy among a number of these Trump critics. I don't know if you've come up with a word or a label, because you are good at, I think, at naming things, for this dynamic where whenever Trump is accused of something by someone, they almost always end up being guilty of it themselves. Okay? And for instance, obviously right now, you have these investigations going on, referred to the DOJ for, into Adam Schiff for mortgage fraud, into Letitia James for mortgage fraud, into, now this Fed governor for mortgage fraud. You come after someone for mortgage fraud and you throw the book at him, and you end up having this ludicrous, ridiculously oversized penalty because of it. And suddenly it's like he woke up, it's as if the people around Trump woke up to the fact, well, why are they so interested in mortgage fraud? What do they know about mortgage fraud that would, perhaps lead them to ask these questions in the first place? And it turns out that this is something that they've perhaps been skirting and getting away with for some time. This is obviously not the only area where this has happened. We've seen so many others, when it came to the, use of the possession of classified information. It turns out that Joe Biden had classified materials that dated back all the way before he was president, from the Foreign Relations Committee and from his time as VP, that he had stored, even with even less security. And so, look, and we've seen, of course, the most recently, the FBI showing up at John Bolton's house, which apparently is connected to something similar to that. Have you come up with a label for this? Like, what do we name this dynamic? Because it just seems to happen so often that we need a name.
It's so funny you say that, because I'm actually toying with the idea of a column just about that, about the Democrats being the party of projection. I think it's as simple as that. Everything that they accuse their enemies of, particularly Donald Trump, is something that they have done themselves, are doing, or want to do. And so it's all psychological projection. And it's, I guess, a very effective tool, because they've managed to wrap Trump up in all sorts of crazy allegations until it stops working. Because, again, it's like the boy who cried wolf. They lie often enough that the general public, most of them who are totally brainwashed, just no longer trust them and think that everything that comes out of their mouth is total garbage, which is a problem for all of us, because, say Donald Trump does do something that he needs to be called out for, no one's going to pay any attention to the critics. Yeah,
I think you're right on that point. Connecting back to my younger days of playing first-person shooters online, it was always true that whoever was the first person in a game to accuse somebody else of using an aimbot, they were 100% using an aimbot.
Isn't that funny? That's a useful. It's a frigid youth does have its uses. I often think of that. I think the times that I spent wasting time doing silly things when I was young, and yet there's always a lesson that comes out of it.
Yes, there really is. I want to ask you about some of the developments that have happened in recent weeks surrounding one Hunter Biden. And I have to say that my wife must have some kind of alert set up, because she always is texting me frantically, have you seen this latest Hunter Biden thing? And of course, the seconds after it happens. And then, of course, I always have to go back and look at it after. Are you, one, knowing as much as you do about Hunter, are you surprised that in the midst of his father presumably going through significant treatment, obviously the health issues that he's been public about, that this would be the time that Hunter would come forward with this type of chip on his shoulder and these lengthy messages to the public? And are you at all surprised at the venue, the sort of odd venue that he chose in order to do this via this YouTuber?
No, not on either. I mean, Hunter Biden craves attention, and he really believes that he has a sort of a philosophical, intellectual, musings that the world really needs to hear. And you know that from the laptop, because there's just endless audio recordings and video recordings of him spouting forth. And so I think he really, and I assume drugs has something to do with that, the rambling nature of it. But he has political ambitions, and he wants to be famous. He and his wife, his second wife, there some stuff I reported on was they had a documentary crew into their house to discuss the idea, or producers to discuss the idea of sort of having a show about their lives. They were both very keen to do it, and this was back in 2019, and I think wiser heads prevailed. They decided Joe Biden's campaign people put the kibosh on it. Because it would have been absolutely disastrous for Joe Biden's campaign. And all they were doing at that stage was trying to, catch and kill all of Hunter's scandals and throw enormous sums of money at, ex-wives and IRS fines and the baby mama, and just to fund his lifestyle. And they managed to get Kevin Morris, the Hollywood entertainment attorney, to foot the bill to the tune of, I think it's at least $8 million. So that wasn't going to happen. And so I just feel now he's got to choose someone that he's comfortable with, who isn't going to ask any of the minefield questions that that even a Joe Rogan, who's not a journalist, is going to ask. So he's got a tame, sort of nobody YouTuber who seems to be enamored of him and admire him greatly, and thinks that everything that comes out of his mouth is just a philosophical gem. And so he feels comfortable with him. And I think also somewhere in his head, he believes that what he's doing is not harmful to his father, but he's helping his father. He's going out there and defending his father because no one in the Democratic Party is doing it. And he sees, I think quite rightly, that the Democratic Party has decided that they're going to explain away the catastrophic loss in 2024 by blaming Joe Biden and saying Joe Biden was selfish. His original sin was not pulling out of running for a second term. He knew that he wasn't right in the head, and the people around him knew that he wasn't capable of serving a second term, let alone running an election campaign. And Hunter doesn't want to hear that, because that's an implicit criticism of him, because I would say that he was his father's number one advisor, with Jill Biden coming a close second, and her factotum, Anthony Bernal, probably equal with Jill. And that was Hunter Biden's judgment, was that Joe Biden run again, that he dig in after that documentary, after that disastrous debate. So I think Hunter Biden, we're going to see a lot more of him. He's also allegedly broke, although he's still managing to pay a lot of money for rent and have a pretty nice lifestyle, jetting around the world. So he's on paper, he's broke. That's what he's telling the courts, because he's having to pull out of all these lawsuits that he launched against various people that he felt had done him wrong. And his excuse always is that he just hasn't got enough money. And Abby Lowell, his very expensive lawyer, is now suing him for unpaid legal fees. So meanwhile, hilariously, ironically, Abby Lowell is defending people like Adam Schiff, and he's just taken up the case of Lisa Cook, the Reserve Bank governor, caught up in the same mortgage fraud allegations as Adam Schiff and Tish James, and she's hired Abby Lowell to defend her after Donald Trump fired her last night.
I think that one of the things that's interesting about Hunter is that he does scratch an itch for Democrats that reminds me it reminds me a little bit of Michael Avenatti. When there was that brief moment when sort of Avenatti came on the scene and was saying all these tough sounding things about going after Trump, and there was this moment when, the ladies of The View were saying, that he should run for president, and he was openly. I'll actually tell you my Michael Avenatti story, which is that I was at an event in Austin, Texas, where it turned out that he was speaking, not obviously at the same event same panel that I was. And I saw him making his way around a room, like glad handing, as if he was a politician, trying to meet everyone in the room and that kind of thing. And it was at that particular moment, and he came over toward me, and I stood up, and I had never seen him in person before, and for whatever reason, I mean, it just came out. I said, "Oh, you're shorter than I thought," and he looked at me just like this like one of the nastiest stares that I've ever seen. But he also seemed kind of shocked, and then he just moved on. But it was just very funny because he was. I was just like, that guy's too short to run for president. Anyway,
probably his shortness has probably driven every insecurity he's ever had his entire life, and led him up the path.
So Hunter is not short. Hunter is tall, and Hunter is actually can be quite charming, as many addicts actually are. And
he's quite intelligent.
And he's quite intelligent. Do you think that he has a legitimate shot at rebuilding himself into someone, who could get elected to something, become an actual participant in Democrat politics at a moment when they seem to be craving, toughness? And, I mean, you see Gavin Newsom trying to do something like that when it comes to his online persona, at least, which is manufactured. And I think the joke is kind of wearing out. But, there is some kind of craving for this on the Democratic side that we've seen play out before. Is this something where Hunter can scratch that itch?
I mean, I hate to say yes, but when I first heard this from,
but you love to say yes.
Very well. Yeah,
you hate to say it, but you love to say it.
It's a horrible thought because he really is. He's not a good person. But politics is so crazy in this country, and the Democrats are so desperate that I wouldn't be surprised. And he does have killer qualities. And he is ambitious. And so someone who's very close to him told me this when I was writing the second book. And I scoffed and laughed and said, as if, it's ridiculous. And this person convinced me just with evidence and logic. And at the end of it, I thought, oh, you're right. And there is evidence on the laptop that, and actually in his own memoir, that he wanted to go into politics. After his brother Beau died, he was at the funeral and he had to give a eulogy. And afterwards, all the great and the good, all his father's and his brother's political allies were coming up to him, shaking his hand and congratulating him. And obviously that went to his head. So he's in the car on the way out with his then wife, Kathleen, who's a very sensible, down-to-earth Chicagoan. Seems like an absolutely pleasant, lovely person who was treated abysmally by him. But anyway, he says to her, hey, I'm thinking that I should go into politics. Everyone there was telling me, I was really good at it. And she just looked at him with scorn and said, are you kidding? You've just been thrown out of the Naval Reserves because of cocaine on your first weekend. There's no way that you can ever have a political career. And he says in his memoir, he never forgave her after that. And you can see the raging that he does in various writings in the laptop of how that really wounded him. It was a narcissistic wound from his wife to scoff at his political ambitions. So I don't think those ambitions really have gone away. And he would see himself as carrying the torch for the Biden name and avenging his father and, avenging his brother, who was supposed to be the next stage of the Biden dynasty that Joe Biden imagined in all his delusionary imaginings was going to happen. Joe Biden modeled himself on the Kennedy clan, very much so from a very young age, really admired JFK because he also was Catholic and from, a very Catholic sort of community, an Irish Catholic, and thought that that was sort of the Kennedys had broken that glass ceiling. And so he wanted to get there too. And so he used to, he'd model himself on the Kennedys, even down to going for holidays on not Martha's Vineyard, he was a little bit different, but Nantucket, which his family had zero connection to. But they made it a point, he and Jill, of every summer they would go there and they would have a family holiday, and they were imprinting, he's talked about that, and so she, imprinting this as a family place to go. And so I think that Hunter feels that it's his birthright, and that's part of what he's doing now, crafting a brand. And I think he won't take much advice on that. I think he thinks that he's the smartest brandmeister and advisor that his father ever had, and he trusts himself. But he does have Kevin Morris. I think Kevin Morris certainly closed the pocketbook, and I don't know if their relationship, I don't think it's as close as it once was. I think Kevin Morris's personal life took a big hit, and his reputation, by his association with Hunter. In return, he got a lot of access to the White House. I think he quite enjoyed that. And he has a lot of money. But Kevin Morris is a smart guy. I mean, he just pulled off another streaming deal for mega bucks for the South Park guys. And, he's got savvy. So he's also was filming Hunter Biden throughout the sort of last couple of years of Joe's presidency, all the dramas and the torment that Hunter and his wife were going through with the terrible Republicans, James Comer coming after them, and then of course all the lawsuits. So all the criminal cases, criminal trial that he was found guilty of in Delaware, which was a very high drama moment, and then of course he pleaded guilty in California to the tax felonies. And then there was his dramatic moment when he broke in, he gate crashed one of James Comer's hearings, and then went out and put up a little podium on the Senate side and gave a press conference, and sort of that, to me, that was like in the Kevin Morris movie, that would have been the highlight of, Mr. Biden goes to Washington, Hunter Biden goes to Washington. So who knows when that will come out, but no doubt they will try to make money off it, whether it's a new book or whether it's a political campaign. I mean, he may run for something small in LA, like LA mayor or something, and as a springboard to bigger and better things. And honestly, I think it would be terrible for the country to have a president, Hunter Biden, but it would be so amusing to watch the the Democrats tear themselves in knots trying to beat him down. Like Gavin Newsom, as you said, is pretending to be Mr. Tough Guy, is trying to emulate Donald Trump, but he's milquetoast compared to Hunter Biden.
Yeah. There's a comment that you made in there that I think people should appreciate. If you go back, and you may have actually shared this online, but I'm sure you probably have seen it. You can go back and you can find like one of the original articles about Joe Biden and his political ambitions, and it's all framed through the lens of this is the next Kennedy. It was framed from the beginning, literally before he had even done anything, other than just sort of being there and being a lawyer and having these political ambitions. It's framed as like this is the next Kennedy family. And I have always felt like that the issue for someone like Hunter and the reason that he has such a chip on his shoulder about some of this stuff is that when he looks over at the Kennedys, he sees a political dynasty that got away with a ton of stuff, and that his resentment is that somehow it's like, why can't I get away with this the way that they got away with it? Why do I have to end up in court as opposed to, it's like Ted, left a girl there, it's
a good question. It's a fair question.
Yeah. And I think that there's some resentment that is drawn from that, but I absolutely think he's going to have a political career. I don't know whether it's going to work out because he's going to have to pick the right thing. And he's going to have enough backing to do it. But I just think there's such a void on their side right now that he could take advantage of it. I do want to ask you before we wrap up about sort of the state of the Democratic Party today as you see it. Obviously, the focus has been on a couple of different factors. One in particular being the level of craziness that they've engaged in, their inability to kind of step away from that craziness, and the acceptance of a greater degree of policy craziness, like not just the vocal, but the positioning in the forms of people like Zoran Mondani and the like. I want to play for you just a bit of sound from the DNC meeting that they had in Minnesota this week. I don't know if you've seen some of the things that have been coming out of this, but the stuff that they were saying was pretty off the wall. Let's have cut 5.
I first want to take a moment to thank the chairs of the AAPI, the Black, the Disability, Hispanic, LGBTQ, Native American, Women's, and Regional Caucuses.
Oakland is in the house. I just happen to be Oakland's first Black woman mayor.
Minnesota ranks the highest per capita for being a safe haven for transgender individuals in Minnesota.
And cut 6.
This is authoritarianism. It's fascism dressed in a red tie. Donald Trump has dragged our country into chaos.
This stupid freaking red hat. The felon in the White House, listen to him and that will be fine. These are fascist policies.
Donald Trump is hurting us. That he is hurting people from Oregon to Kentucky. He is hurting people in red, purple, and blue states.
And I want to point out to you, by the way, they began the whole DNC national meeting with a land acknowledgement, of course, of being on stolen land in Minneapolis. I just want to point out to you, Tim Walz and Amy Klobuchar, prior to even a couple of years ago, they were thought of as being pretty much mainstream Democrats. And yet they're the ones who are using this type of rhetoric and have embraced this type of approach. And one would think that after the experience in 2024 that they would roll that back just a little bit. They haven't. Why haven't they?
I know, it's a great question, and I think is vexing a lot of sensible people, and also Democrats, independents, former Democrats, many of them. I mean, you look at the Democrat registration, voter registration, it's at historic deficits for the first time ever to the Republicans. And the New York Times did a long, mournful story with all the stats, and any Democrat looking at that should be, sending out the alarms, because that party is in free fall. down the gurgler. And the only energy there is in the Marxist wing, not even the socialist wing. I mean, Mamdani is just an out-and-out Marxist. And this is not a recipe for success in the United States. It might get you, in a few gerrymandered districts, in a deep blue city, you might manage to eke out some city council and maybe even a mayoral win. But it's just it'll just send the Democrat Party further and quicker to its death. And so I don't know. I mean, where are the courageous Democrats? Where are the centrists? Where are the people willing to pull it back to the center? All you see is kind of fraudulent ones who, when they've got a tough election, like Abigail Spanberger, former CIA operative, now, pretending to be like a real centrist and she almost sounds like a Republican sometimes, to try and win that election. And then they pander to the left again. So I think it's, I don't know what they do. They need a courageous leader, and Gavin Newsom is not that person. And I think that it's the Democratic Party so on the nose. They doubled down on identity politics after an election that was a resounding rejection of identity politics. And it's just insane to me that they would be doing these land acknowledgements and talking about, every color under the rainbow splinter identity group, as if the desires of a tiny minority should overwhelm the needs of the entire American population. And that's what's got them into trouble. Joe Biden was supposedly a moderate for most of his career, and he enacted some of the most leftist, awful, disastrous policies, apart from being incompetent, the Afghan withdrawal, but also the open border. I mean, that is the most radical policy you could have. The fact that he turned the White House into a kind of a tranny party zone, the Rose Garden. I mean, it just turned off a lot of regular people, a lot of people who might have voted Democrat and who believed in 2020 that he was the answer to the chaos of the first Trump administration. So the Democrats are just chaos, and I think people are seeing that. And I don't know how they come back from it, except that a real charismatic leader who didn't just have hating Donald Trump as the centerpiece of their policy platform could actually be, I mean, I think Republicans would embrace that person, not necessarily vote for them, but at least give them a fair go, because it's terrible for the country to have only one party sitting in the rational space.
Well, I think it's particularly terrible for the country to have only one party sitting in the rational space when it comes to law and order.
Yes.
In my entire life, politically, the Democrats who succeeded, particularly on the national level, were those who embraced law and order, and who were pro-cop, who were who did not want chaos in American cities. Bill Clinton was a tough on crime guy. Like, I mean, obviously, that was a major aspect to his career. That was a major aspect of Joe Biden's career. It was one of these things where, it's a point of distinction between them and the anarchic socialist Marxist, a wing of the left. And that is the thing that seems to have disappeared in a very short order since the summer of Floyd and everything else. And it's shocking to me because, to be honest, I think that the kind of Democrat that you're talking about, in addition to whatever, charisma and political ability that they need to be willing to sort of say, our biggest problem are these Soros prosecutors who aren't enforcing the law and aren't protecting the people. And I'm going to be somebody who's in favor of protecting the people. And that's a big deal. And you can't just get into this argument where you're citing, I've made this point before, but so many of the people who are out there claiming that crime rates are down are claiming it because they're able to point back to the height of COVID and say that basically since then, things are down. It's like, well, of course things are down, since then, but that doesn't mean anything in the context of a DC where people don't feel safe, Chicago where people don't feel safe, a Baltimore, an LA, et cetera.
New York.
New York. If Mamdani wins, and again, it's a big if, but the analysts who I trust, say that it's more likely than not that he does at this point. If he wins, do you believe that New York runs the risk of becoming an object lesson of what not to do for the rest of the country when it comes to crime?
Well, I hope not. Look, we lived through de Blasio, and this guy looks to be worse than de Blasio.
Oh, yeah. De Blasio was too high all the time to actually put things into motion.
But he also didn't like the cops, probably because they interfered with his lifestyle. No, he was the original anti-cop mayor, and he rolled back all the good work so quickly. The 20 years of Giuliani and Bloomberg, and he just rolled that back in an instant. With the help of Andrew Cuomo. We must not forget Andrew Cuomo completely bowed to the left of his party with bail reform and all the rest that has set up a situation in New York where, Eric Adams tries, but he really hasn't had a lot of luck. He has improved things somewhat since de Blasio, I have to say. But under Mamdani, it'll just go back to the bad old days, and maybe even worse. I somehow feel, though, that there is a bottom with New York. We have the NYPD. It is a serious city.
I'll just interject and say, yes, I think that the real saving grace for New York is that you have a police force that is as top-notch as it is. And not every city has that, and I think that's the real reason why, Chicago isn't as bad of a way as it is. But please continue.
And a very, very good police commissioner in Jessica Tisch, very unlikely police commissioner, an heiress. But she's been very good. A lot of people were trying to get her to run for mayor, but she declined. But she's Mamdani, I think, is intimating that he would keep her on. But still, he's going to set things backwards because his policy platform is to just do away with misdemeanors. And so that just leads to that level, it's the reverse broken windows, just that level of street chaos and dysfunction that makes people feel unsafe and emboldens criminals. And, just the illegal migrants that are in town who are still camped out in hotels in Midtown, and they have scooters. And they ride around on the footpaths, on the sidewalks in the middle of the night. They steal mail from the mailboxes. They snatch phones and snatch jewelry from people. It's really frightening. And that's, the NYPD is not what it used to be. It's had a recruitment problem. The new recruits aren't being properly, they've lowered the bar to get recruits in because people, no one wants to be a cop when you are being held criminally, personally liable for something that might go wrong in an arrest. And that was another disaster here in New York, which was removing the qualified immunity that cops had. So now they tell me, I could lose my house. If I go and arrest that panhandler who's being aggressive to people in Times Square, he hasn't got a knife, he hasn't got a weapon, there's no real reason to go and hassle him. And if I do something and it goes wrong, I'll lose my house and my wife won't forgive me. And one of them said, my wife tells me every time I go, don't do anything. And they stand around reading their phones and really not doing anything as the chaos unfolds. It's not the days of Bloomberg and Giuliani. And I think that those disincentives for cops will just continue to ratchet up. So I don't know. The other problem for New York is that, a lot of the wealthier people are moving out. And already someone told me that there are a lot of sales going on. Realtors are getting a lot of inquiries for sales of high-end apartments in New York because people just they just don't want to be sitting ducks to be fleeced by this guy to pay for big government with non-existent taxes.
You know, in D.C., our experience here has been interesting because anyone who is local knows exactly where the problem areas are, and they know that the people there would like to have a heavier presence when it comes to cops on the street, and particularly, I would say, the elimination of the homeless encampments that are around the city.
Yes,
which
Union
people
Station.
People act as if it's something that can be easily ignored. Trust me, if you have children, it's not easily ignored, and it's also something that is just an ever-present risk and constant, examples of people ODing on the street and the like. You know, the other day there was a video that went viral of a man being arrested by ICE and yelling and screaming while he was being arrested, that went everywhere. And even to the point that I saw people in Europe who I follow on X tweeting out about it angrily, about creeping fascism and the like. Of course, it turns out that the guy has entered the United States illegally multiple times, and he's not here legally. And in addition to this, he was arrested for a sexual assault on someone under the age of 13. Across the river in the same area where I live earlier this year, and the prosecutor declined to prosecute him because the proprosecutor is, of course, a Democrat.
Why was that? Why did they decline to prosecute?
They declined to prosecute him because they said that they were unlikely to get a conviction because they were unlikely to be able to get testimony from the child who was involved, which you always know is one of the reasons that something like that happens. But the point is, when you see something like that happen, there's this huge blow up from the left, and the whole kind of thing goes viral. And then it always seems like after the fact you find out, oh, well, there was actually a whole reason why they were paying attention to this guy, and most of the time.
And usually it's that they were a child molester or a rapist.
Yes, it's usually something along those lines where it's like, why not have an attitude of, look, I understand skepticism, the cops need to prove their case, the prosecutors need to prove their case, of course. But there is now this assumption, I think, on one party, on the part of the Democrats, that every time they see an ICE agent or a cop arresting someone, that something horrible is going on, that it's some kind of abuse of people's rights, that it's some kind of abuse. It's not something that's designed to protect the community, when in reality, for the most part, in my experience, and I think the data bears this out, the opposite is true. And to me, I think until they figure that out, I think that they're in a political spiral that they're not going to be able to climb out of.
Yeah, you're spot on. It is law and order, I think, is central to their problem and the most irrational part of it. And opening the border is their original sin.
Yes.
There's just no getting around that. The death and destruction and mayhem that's caused. Mm-hmm. And then they try and justify it by ignoring the criminal element and the terrorist element, even if that is a minority. I mean, it's still an enormous problem that we shouldn't have to contend with. And many victims, part of Donald Trump's campaign was talking to the parents and the loved ones of those victims who were murdered and raped by illegal aliens who should never have been here. So, the Democrats need to admit that was wrong, explain why they did it, which is difficult for them because it was for political reasons to try and enhance their dwindling vote count, and just, rebuild. I don't know if they can even do it from the ashes of the Democratic Party, but it's dangerous for all of us. I think it's very dangerous that there's nobody in the Democratic Party who's willing to rein in this radical, crazy element that have overtaken. They're the parasitic element that's destroying the party, but they're also damaging the country.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think it's going to take someone who has a total disconnect from those years of open border policies in order for them to climb out of that. You can follow Miranda. That's definitely not Gavin Newsom. Miranda Devine is on on X and other social at Miranda Devine, and you can check out her podcast, Pod Force One, at the New York Post. Miranda, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Great to be with you. We'll be back with more of the Big Ben Show right after this.
My daughter, when I was in my 30s, went to school at Stanford. I couldn't stand it. She was so far from Arkansas. So I'd think of reasons to make trips out there, try to come up with a little business or something. I go out there with her. I get an old office downtown Palo Alto. Jean goes to class with her. I said, you know, I need to get some things going out here if I'm going to spend this kind of time. So I went over to Brentwood, about 20 or 30 miles from San Francisco. And I bought about 25 lots, like I was going to build 25 houses. Except I drilled 4 gas wells. And those 4 gas wells in 18 months paid me enough money for me to buy the Dallas Cowboys.
Jerry Jones and his appearance on Taylor Sheridan's Landman, which got people talking about his acting ability. But it turns out it's not his acting ability. It's just the actual story that he has to tell, which is on the most interesting sports documentary of the summer, which is, I think, the rival of something like The Last Dance that we saw about the Chicago Bulls. Netflix's America's Team, this David Ellison produced documentary about the Dallas Cowboys, which, by the way, features a pretty prominent appearance and interview with Rupert Murdoch in it about the way that they changed sports television, is, I think, something that no sports fan should miss, and even non-sports fans should watch, simply for the incredible soap opera of everything that went on in terms of Jerry Jones' purchase of the Dallas Cowboys and everything that happened afterwards. It's really kind of a story about the 1990s and everything related to it, but it's also a tragic story. It's a Western tragedy that seems like something that is jarring when you start to understand some of the family dynamics involved. I compared it to a friend about it feels like I'm watching The Godfather, but there's no Michael. and when it comes to Jerry Jones' kids and the choices that were made along the way that they do business, it's both incredibly impressive. His P.T. Barnum entertainment ability, his understanding of the way that media works, his hustle is incredible, but it's also like watching a Mad Caesar to a certain extent. And there's some incredibly shocking moments in terms of the interviews that they have, the total access that they have to the key figures from that era who, are for the most part still alive and around. You know, the interviews that they have with Jimmy Johnson and Barry Switzer, and some of the personal animosity that still flows through a lot of this. It's really an incredible piece of sports documentary making, and I think it's impossible to miss. And there's all sorts of cameos along the way. I particularly love one of a shot of Jack Nicholson sitting in the Rose Bowl during the Cowboys Super Bowl against the Bills, where they pull off a play and score, and he pulls on his cigarette and smiles at the camera. And it's just one of these things where it takes you back to a moment in time that I think was iconic in terms of changing the nature of the way that America didn't just view sports, but viewed the National Football League. It's about the National Football League becoming America's sport and taking over the place of baseball in particular as being the greatest thing on television. Look, we're on the eve of the beginning of this NFL season. I don't think the Dallas Cowboys are in that great of a position. I think that their problems with Micah Parsons are real, but I also think that they are still a fascinating story within the realm of sports, and you should not miss this Netflix documentary. I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can email us, as always, at bigben@fox.com. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.